So coming up here in this outfit, there were some people who on the porch greeted me right away saying, Good Shabbos. So I'll say to you, Good Shabbos, and you say back to me, Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos. Now, there is an intonation. When you say Good Shabbos, and comes sort of from a deep, restful place. Good Shabbos. All right, let me hear you say that. Good Shabbos. Okay, you see, we are already in a much better place. You have been working on issues around spiritual direction, and that's wonderful stuff, because I believe that more people are needed to help people with that. Could you imagine way back, before we had psychologists, who were the people who took care of people who had inner concerns and wanted to open up their heart to someone and get the help? It was people who guided them in metanoia. Metanoia was the word, and it's tshuva and tauba in Arabic, tshuva in Hebrew, and it means a realignment, in a way, to the way in which one has to be. And it means also a turning over, a returning. And so that was a very important function. And after a while it gets secularized to a place where if I were to go to the 50s, any question about spirituality would have been pushed away by people who were in the shrinking business, because they would have seen this as a how would I say, a detour from where one really had to be. Pay attention to the troubles, pay attention to the complexes and so on and so forth, and how you deal with the world and how you deal with yourself. And it was a very important in-between phase. But after Freud came somebody by the name of Roberto Assagioli, who was talking about it's not only analysis that you need, but spirituality is a necessary ingredient. And he wrote a remarkable paper in his book on psychosynthesis, in which he was talking about the psychological disturbances as a result of spiritual growth. Now, you see, most of the time we would say, come on, how could you have any more psychological disturbances? You grew spiritually, you've already arrived. And the truth is not so, because every time there's a new reconstellation of a person, and if a person goes through a process of metanoia, then of course there's bound to be disturbances, because ways of acting, ways of being with people, all these have now changed, because and it doesn't seem to work if you carry on the way you carried on before. Somehow it feels upsetting. And so he wanted to deal with that stuff, and that was wonderful when that came in. And then people were talking, like Jung were talking about archetypes. And you know what? I have a feeling that while everybody uses the word archetypes, there isn't quite a sense of the reality of the archetypes. You know, it looks like some idea of stuff. But there's a reality there, and when you read Corben, who wrote on Ibn al-Arabi and the imaginal work of his, it becomes clear that these archetypes are living things. And in fact, we live in the archetypes. And it's always an issue of which archetypes we log on to, as it were, and which become active in us. And that's important stuff. One of the things that has to happen in spiritual direction is to help people, how how would I say, repair their dream stuff. Because when a person has a hope, a dream, a people has a hope, a dream, that hope, that dream becomes the frame in which the life of that person or that country exists. So if I dream something that, let's say it's a dream of my vocation, because people will tell you, you can take all the workshops you want to be a spiritual director, but if you don't have a vocation, if you haven't been called to that, then you're just another professional, you know, and that's not quite what you're coming to do. So what is it that falls apart for people? And as I talked yesterday about the crisis in which we are, which the planet is, and so on, the shattered dreams are very much where that stuff is happening. And when I start looking at civics classes that any of us may have had when we were younger, and we were told about the founding fathers and what America is about, you know, da 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 da. It still brings up in us that fragment of the dream that we once had, that this country would be. And if they were given a melody right now to where this country is, it would be like the mad stuff of someone going through the dial of the whole radio and doing snatches of this and snatches of that, you know? And that's how it feels, what kind of music we would make at this point. So it is really important to get to dream that dream. And let me put it in more, how would I say, cooler language rather than warmer language. We live constantly in cycles. They're short cycles, like heartbeat, breath, and so on and so forth. Still shorter cycles that have to do with hearing and with seeing. And then there are the larger cycles that have to do with the cycle of a day, a cycle of a week, a month, a year. But if someone were to say, what is my purpose, what is my goal, what is my task, what is it? That happens to be one of those large curves. And sometimes the curves that are more large are, how would I say, more noetic. They have a lot more of the deeper stuff in them. So in the warmer way of talking about these dreams, it means that the whole world is a stage and everybody is an actor and so on and so forth. So if I have no script whatsoever as to where this play is to go in which I'm to participate, I'm going to be lost. And there aren't any good ones around these days. You know, you would say, can anybody sell me a good dream? And I don't find them anymore. You know, I go back thinking of Hazrat Inayat Khan, when he, in the value that he experienced, when the Qawwali singers were singing, when he was making the kind of music that he was making, and the vision that he had of the wholeness and the oneness of everything as it is, and he felt, oi, if I could only bring this to the West. He didn't say, oi, but you know, but when I go into his guts, I feel that if I can only bring this to the West. And can you imagine the dream he might have had about what it would look like when Western people would do zikr, when Western people would be remembering themselves in the presence of God and all that stuff, when there would be that beauty that he knew that has more notes than the Western music has, would come, what that would be like. So you see, he had this dream. And of course, Martin Luther King Jr. when he was talking about, I have a dream, you know. So for us, the Shabbos afternoon time is a time to touch again that realm where the dream is. And to ask this kind of question, soon Shabbos will be over. We'll make the Havdalah, the separation between Shabbat and the weekday. And then, where are we going next? With what will we meet the next week? And you Hasidim would often sing in this way, you know. How could we handle the week to come if we don't have enough spiritual energy and focus and so on and so forth? So they use this time for singing songs. And while, for instance, some of the melodies for Friday night would be in 3/4 time, and those melodies that would be for Shabbos morning and noon would be more like 4/4 and marching time and happier ones. When it came to Shalashudas, they would sing these kind of slower things that would take him into that place. So we'll do a chant here, and then we're going to go and hear some stories, because something happens when we hear a story. You know, when my friend Shlomo Kalabach would tell his stories, and I called him and I said that he is the genius of virtuous reality. Meaning that when he told stories about people who did things out of great virtue and deep feeling and so on and so forth, what happened to us was that we would begin to feel that same thing. Oh, how much I would like to be, I want to be in that number, you know, where this happens. I want to live in such a world where I can make this more true. And so this is what the stories are doing. So this chant will go like this. The Hebrew word is tamid and echad. Tamid, always, echad, one. And in English we'll say always and forever, always and forever, always and forever, one, okay? Melody is simple. Tamid, 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 good, once more. Tamid, 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 And now would be a good time to hear the story, whatever else you want to share. Pardon? Oh, sure. Eve asked me to sing a melody from one of the great Hasidic saints in which there is this wonderful longing feeling that belongs to this. You can't go wrong by scatting along Yababa. And it will also be good if you follow the melody, because hearing it is one thing, but singing it engages chakras. Okay? Later on we'll have to do the mushroom thing just to, okay? Okay, sweetie, it's time.
Once these are very good mics. I'm used to telling my darling to hold the mic right up to here. This is marvelous. There was a young man among the many not very well educated young men, this is a very strong mic, of a city in the Middle East. And he would hang out with his friends, and they would make their living by just hanging out and seeing who needs help. Do you need help schlepping something? Do you need an errand run, and so on? So they would make a little bit of money, and what wasn't needed for bare necessities, they would spend drinking, gambling. They were young men in the fullness of their strength, but with nothing much to guide them, and no goal whatsoever. There was one day, a time, when they were hanging out, doing their work near the palace, and the unheard of happened. The sedan chair that was carrying the princess, somebody twisted an ankle. They had to put it down before scooting her into the courtyard, because otherwise she would never be seen in public. And for a few moments, they had to put the sedan chair down, and she was surrounded by her ladies and rushed in through the door into the courtyard, but not before this young man caught a glimpse of her face. And he stopped dead. He had never seen a face like that before, and he was completely transfixed. After a while, his friend said, "What's with you? Come on." And he tried to forget her face and go back to the life he had been leading all this time, and he was finding it less and less possible, because that face stayed before him wherever he went, and he was distraught, and he didn't have much appetite to eat, he didn't have much appetite to play with his comrades the way he used to, and when they made jokes about him and that glimpse of the princess, he got really angry and got into some fistfights. And he began, little by little, hanging out more and more near the palace on the off chance that this would happen once again. Now, we know how unlikely that would have been, but it did happen once again, where she had to come down from her sedan chair before reaching the palace gate, and he happened to be there that very time, and he wasn't taking any chances on missing this again. Completely distraught, he threw himself at her feet, kissed the hem of her robe, and said, "I'm totally in love with you. When can we be together?" Well, the princess had been brought up in a diplomatic family, and so she said, "In the cemetery." But the young man had not been brought up in a diplomatic family, and he took her words quite literally and betook himself immediately to the cemetery, where he sat and waited. And waited. And waited a very long time, and kept waiting. The first day he told himself it was unexpected, she must be very busy. The second day he told himself, princesses have all sorts of duties that I have no idea what they are. She must not be able to make it today. This went on from day to day. And he sat, and all he saw before him was the beauty of her face. It made the waiting light and swift. And he stayed. It began getting cold, and people who passed by and saw him there thought, perhaps this is a young man doing tawbah, doing teshuvah, repenting for some sin, and he's vowed to stay in the cemetery. Well, we can't let him starve there. So they would leave little bits of food near him, and almost as in a trance, he would eat the food. But he sat there, completely absorbed in the contemplation of the beauty of the face of the princess, whom he had seen only twice. It began getting cold. Somebody had pity on him and left a blanket nearby. Almost as in a trance, he wrapped himself in it and sat there, thinking of the princess. This is going on a very long time by then. And he couldn't avoid seeing the other things that passed right in front of him in the cemetery. So, first he saw the face of the caretaker of the cemetery, who was also the gravedigger, who was very old and very calm, very peaceful. And then he began seeing what happened in the cemetery. People would come to the graves of their loved ones, and sometimes they would cry, and sometimes they would talk to the soul of the beloved who had left. He saw who got brought to the cemetery. Everyone. Everyone, from the old people whom one expected to see there, who, when they were alive, those last bits were barely different from when they crossed over and were being buried, to young beloved men and women whose lovers came in grief for a long time before the grief finally subsided, to young parents, to even young children and infants. Everyone eventually came to the cemetery and was buried. And it began occurring to him that the princess whose beauty he so appreciated and was so in love with, that this would happen to her too, that she also would grow old and her beauty would fade, and eventually she would be as skeletal as some of the little old ladies he had seen brought to the cemetery and buried, and eventually she too would be buried. And eventually what might happen to her is what he'd seen happen to some of the others. That is, a bone now and then would rise to the surface, and she too would pass. And then he began to be curious why that thought. And he could see in his mind's eye that beauty shrinking and fading and changing. And that didn't diminish at all the total devotion of his heart towards the princess whose beauty had so transfixed him, even though that beauty clearly, at least the beauty that his eyes would see, would go. And so as he sat there, he began contemplating where that beauty was really from and what might be its source. By this time, it was a very long time. It was years. And people began seeing that he was there, he wasn't leaving, and they figured he must have done his penance, he must by now be a saint who might be able to intercede and pray for him. And so the first person came who thought this and sat down before him and began to pour out the grief of his heart. He was a little startled. This hadn't happened to him before. But by that time, he'd been so long in the cemetery that even though he was startled, nothing deeply surprised him. So he sat and he listened. And at the end of the man's story, he asked for a blessing, for help. And with all his heart, this man could say, "I wish that you be blessed with all good." And the man left. And evidently, something good must have happened because he told others. And so people began coming almost daily to receive blessing from the man who was sitting contemplating the face of his beloved, to whom he had only spoken a few words, sitting in the cemetery. And the years passed like this. By now, he had heard all sorts of troubles of the heart, all sorts of difficulties, and given all sorts of blessings. And the face of his beloved was still before him. Well, what had happened in the meantime to the princess? She had done as princesses do. She had been given in a diplomatic marriage to a prince. By that time, they were king and queen. She was very fortunate because, although this was a diplomatic match, it turned out that it was a love match as well. And so her life was very good. And there was only one lack, and that was that she had no children, and they didn't know how their reign was going to continue with no children. She tried everything. She had gone to the conventional doctors. She had gone to the alternative doctors. She had gone to healers, and she had gone to holy men. And nothing helped. No children, no pregnancy. Seeing her grief, one of her maidservants finally got up her nerve and said, "You know, when one of us has a specific problem, a deep, difficult problem, there is a saint who sits in the cemetery whom we sometimes go to, and if we receive blessing from him, things usually work out." And the princess said, "Oh, really? Tomorrow morning, before dawn, way before dawn, come to me in this room with one of your outfits so that nobody will know who I am, and take me there." She said, "I'll do it." And the next morning, way before dawn, she arrived, and the princess dressed as a servant, and the two of them went through the city until they went to the cemetery, and by that time, the sun was just beginning to rise, and there was the saint sitting in the cemetery. The princess came and bowed before him, and before she opened her mouth, he had stood up and bowed before her and said, "Your Majesty." She was dressed as a servant and she was veiled. "How did you know?" And he said, "Oh, your face has been before me ever since I sat here. I don't even know how long it's been. I would recognize you anywhere, wrapped in anything. But nobody comes to me here without a problem. What's on your heart?" And so she told him. And he gave her his blessing with all his heart and said, "You can't know it, but it's really because of you that I've become who I am. I give you the blessing that the desire of your heart should be fulfilled splendidly." She bowed and returned home. She did not understand why he said that. And he didn't burden her with the whole story. This kept on for years. Many, many people came to the cemetery and received the blessing for what they most deeply needed, whereas he spent more and more time in contemplation. He had continued to follow the thread of the lucent beauty of the face of the princess, more and more back to its source. And one day, they thought he hadn't moved for a long time. They kept bringing food and putting a blanket over his shoulders, and by the third day, when he still hadn't moved, they checked his pulse and saw that indeed he had finally joined the source of the beauty he had been so devoted to and so seeking. And they buried him as a saint with full honors. The princess carried a pregnancy to full term and had a son. And when the son came of age, she brought him to the cemetery, to the grave of that saint, to tell him the story of his own beginnings.
Can you go back just a moment ago to that sigh that you... Yes. I'd like you to take the next 3 minutes to visit with that sigh and find it inside of yourself, so that that vibration where you just spend time could be accessed to by you again. So coming back to that place where that sigh was that we felt, and that softness, could you imagine then that when you have a session with someone who seeks spiritual counsel from you, if you could find a way to move to that place, with a melody, with quiet, with words, with a poem, with whatever, and you move to that place. Hooked to that place is God's bungee cord. There is that sense that you get pulled again, you know? When you are in that place, it says, into the light, into the love, into the truth, into these places, that's where I want to go. That's what's drawing me. And no matter what else we're going to do, if we don't have that motivation power that comes from the yearning for the good, for the truth, for the beauty, for the light, for God, when you have that motive power, movement will happen. And if you don't have that, then it's going to just stay in the head. As I told you the story of Brother Petrock, the woman, when she asked him the question, how do I place myself in the presence of God, had no idea of how to do that on the inside, and yet she wanted to learn how to do it on the inside. And for him, inside and outside was one. It's almost like, you know, here I'm in the presence of God, what is there? But that thing of being able to do this with other people, sharing together with them, and creating that space of spiritual intimacy where you can talk about these things, you know, this business of not being ashamed to love God, you know, is very important. Because if that doesn't happen in your consultation thing, then you know, you're operating in a world of concepts and ideas, and you can have lots of them, but they aren't going to get you to anything better. So if you can, I'll tell you a little story, and you'll see what I mean by people having to have a story. There was a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Menachem Mendel, and he lived in a town, Vitebsk, in White Russia. And when he was young, he went to study with the great successor of the Baal Shem Tov, the leader of the second generation of Hasidim, and he became his disciple when he was still very young, and he had already great spiritual insight. One day, he was so proud of his achievement and having studied a lot of Talmud and was walking up and down, like, really enjoying his achievement, and his hat had gone to the side a bit. And the teacher came out and said to him, Mendele, how many pages of Talmud did you study today? And he gleefully said, 6. He said, well, with 6, your hat is already on the side. With 12, it'll all the way fall down. Which, if you're a Jew and you want to keep your head covered, you know what I mean? That means almost like apostasy. Watch that pride of yours. He went out and spent some time alone and worked through that and came back crying and said, Rebbe, please help me with this. He says, it's okay, I too need some help myself. We're going to go together and meet the Baal Shem Tov. So they traveled to the great leader, to the Baal Shem Tov, and when Mendele came in, at first, he didn't even greet him. But Shabbos was over, and then the Baal Shem Tov calls him over and lit his pipe. He had one of those long lilkis, and said, sit down, I'll tell you a story. And started to tell him a story. I wish I knew the story, but that was not given in the story that I heard, so and later on, the Maggid asked him, did you understand the story? He says, only up to now. Because he knew that this story was a story of his life. And he understood only up to now of his story, but the story was going on. Once, before he made his aliyah to go and live in Safed, in the holy city of Safed, before he left, he took sick. And as it is, you know, when a great leader takes sick, people stand around him and they recite the prayers and they sort of want to schlep him back, you know, that he shouldn't leave them and so on. So he came out of his deep sleep, if you will, or coma, and turned to them and said, I'm not dying yet. Stop it, I'm not dying yet. And one guy had the chutzpah to ask him, how do you know? He said, because when I was small and the Baal Shem Tov told me a story, according to that story, I have to yet be in the Holy Land. So I'm not dying yet. So can you imagine if we would be able to recover, help our client, I don't know, client isn't such a good word, counselee, whatever we're going to call him, spiritual friend in need of advice is the better way. If we could recover with them their life dream in a way, because it is that which guides the direction in which you want to take him. One Hasidic master said, you can't really be a Rebbe unless you know more than one past incarnation. You know? If you only know one past incarnation, is this one a reaction against this one? Or was there one before? Do you understand that? That whole business. Now, I don't know whether we have the great shamanic power today to know past one incarnation, but the feeling is that this point makes is that there are some people who have print through issues from a past life, and a number of people who went out during the Holocaust and were recycled back and came back with print through memories of that. And it's very difficult for them. And part of the work is to be able to say, this is not this time around. This is not your story, you know. You have another story to live. So, and I could see this in issues that have to do with relationships, that one thinks one is in one story when one is really in another story. And so helping people to sort the story out is an important part. Kabbalah, something come to you about that you want to share about story and dream?
But it's nothing you don't already know, which is how helpful it is not to analyze dreams, but to play with them. So I don't anymore analyze my dreams. I do write them out. I sometimes draw them or paint them, and then have a conversation with what I've drawn or painted, which is very often not the least what I expected to have come out. Or make something that has presented itself as a sort of artifact in the dream. And then, of course, there's the practice of waking dream. Does anybody here know the recent book of Catherine Shainberg called Kabbalah, The Power of Dreaming. Worth taking a look at. She's describing the work of a teacher of hers and mine named Madame Colette Aron-Muscat, whom I knew in Israel and stayed in Israel to learn with for as many years as I was able, who will take you from the point of the dream that has a question. And then, in not even a light state of relaxation, but with your eyes closed, finish the dream differently, find out what wasn't known, or do something different with what was frightening. I don't recommend doing this unless you've had training in it, because it's very potent and very powerful. And as you know, when we make a boo-boo doing something that's potent and powerful, it's a bigger boo-boo. Catherine has a school in New York that she calls the School of Images. Last name is Shainberg, S-H-A-I-N-B-E-R-G. There are other students of our teacher who are all over the country, but Dr. Gerald Epstein has also written some books. One that he has called Waking Dream, which isn't as, how can I put it? He's sort of more medical in his description of things, but it's also really looking too. And then there's the business of regularly revisiting and visioning who we are and what we're here for. Do we have a moment to do an exercise? Do you have a watch? Will you keep time for me, please?
Sure.
It's also a clock on the wall.
Thank you. I should have remembered that. You have 5 minutes. If you have a notebook, use a notebook. But if not, you can do it in your mind. You begin with I am born. You end with I am here. You have 5 minutes to write your life. Between I am born and I am here.
Just repeat.
Repeat. I am born, I am here. 5 minutes to write what happened between those 2 times. I am here. I would love to harvest from you some of what your experiences were. Less the content of what you put than how it felt to do it this time. And is it any different than how you think you would have told your life if you'd had 20 minutes? Please. Have you been this shy all weekend?
Well, when I was born, I remember a lion roaring. And I looked and I was in a crib. It was a baby boy. And the sound of the lion was still roaring in the room, and the windows were vibrating. And I realized that I was now a human. And in this crib, and I had my consciousness. I realized who I was at that time. And as I grew up, I started to become and to see other people and start to imitate what they did. And I learned many things, and I lost what I was when I was a child. And through all those things I learned, I finally realized that it was better for me to go back to being the child that I was, but not to throw away anything I learned, but just to appreciate that consciousness I had when I was 2 years old or 3. A child of God.
Thank you.
It just took me right into a place of deep gratitude and light, and to a place of reverence that I felt as a child.
So what happened for me was realizing that very early on I had this very deep wounding. And so I kept moving to find some healer. And just kept searching and searching until I found someone who handed me off to other healers, who handed me off to other teachers. I finally got that wound healed, that hole filled. And then I found my voice through my writing. And now I feel called to take that into the world.
Well, I found it interesting. I started writing about my parents' legacy and what brought them into this world, and realized that their legacy of alcoholism and sexual abuse and infidelity that had come down from several generations had lived through me as well, and that the point of where I'm at today is really kind of finishing and completing that cycle and transforming it. And I really am very clear on that is where my path has led me to that moment. I've been able to do in this generation, which all of my ancestors weren't capable of doing. So.
I guess what was most powerful for me is the presence of the holy in my childhood, which it took a long time to remember and to touch again, but that has informed me on my whole journey, even when I wasn't aware of it, and that there's a quality of destiny in that place, or among the with the people and the relationship, the powerful particular relationship, that holiness waits until it's found again.
So a bunch of hands in this direction. Let's just go from this direction through. So 1, 2, 3. Please.
It helped me recognize a process of unfolding from the very beginning, and how every experience was necessary for that unfolding, rather than evaluating the experience as good or bad. So every experience was a blessing in its own way.
It was like flying at high altitude and looking down and seeing a landscape that is not apparent from a lower altitude. And because it was only 5 minutes, it was like hitting the high points of that landscape. And I could see the importance of the legacy of the lives that were destroyed in the Holocaust. And I could see the key experience of healing for me in music as a young child with my father. And that music saved me then and always saved me. And that my work now is with families, with young children, and it heals me. And
the assignment, because it had limitation of 5 minutes, it created a fire in my home, thinking, what would I take? And because you started with the word born, it was the sense of coming out of water and the sound of the ocean, and then the first time I ever heard the flute, it opened up the schoolroom and there was no roof and it was straight to heaven, and it's music.
This simple little exercise, as you saw, can evoke all kinds of things, from the prosaic to the profound. And the interesting thing about it is that every time you do it, it's different. If you do it 6 months from now, set your timer, do the same 5 minutes, without looking at what you've done before, and then compare them, you will find every time something different. It's one of the exercises you can safely use with other people because it's concrete, because it's outward. The work I do with imagery, I recommend, unless you're really training, that you don't do with other people because it's exceedingly potent. And unless you're trying to follow someone and make repairs where things are dangerous, it's not a good idea. But this one is always safe.
And looking back at your story, each time sort of a line starts coming out, a line that has to do with meaning, with significance of what it is that you have been guided to do. And it never looks the same way when you ask, what did you think about when you were 16, 18? What did you dream about? What were you hoping about? And where you are right now, it's not the same. But if you go back to that time, and there is that which several of you discovered as you were writing this exercise, that there was a time of say, of high calling, of high longing for the ideal life, for living the ideal life. And it's that place where we make our commitment from, when we say, as it says with Isaiah hears a voice that says, "Whom shall I send and who will go for us?" And he says, "Okay, count me in, I will go." Because that thing has something to do with I can't do the whole job. And I can't help everybody. But those who do come to me, I have to keep a certain amount of discernment around to see if they really are some people for whom I have a word to say or not. I take you back now to a long, long time ago. We are now about the 2nd century of the Common Era, and somewhere in the desert of Egypt, there were some people who were the hermits of the desert. And those desert fathers were remarkable people. And so they were seen as elders, and the word for elder in that sense translates in Arabic into shaykh, and in Russian into starets. So you have that sense. These were the people to whom people would come for that kind of counsel. So there were 2 people in the stories of the Desert Fathers who would go every day to Abba Poemen, that was his name, and ask him for counsel. And he would have a verbum for them. A verbum, a word. Just like a sentence that somebody would speak at a Quaker meeting, a verbum. And every day he gave them a verbum, and then they one day come back and they say, "Do you have a verbum for me today?" "No, I don't." So they said, "How come you don't have a verbum? Every day you give us one, why not today?" He says, "Most probably you didn't do anything with the one I gave you yesterday." You see, he doesn't feel that he has to manufacture a good saying, If it comes down, it comes down. He is not a failure if he doesn't have a word to say at that time. I once had an appointment to see my Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and I was on the list for that audience, but I didn't get called that time, and I didn't get called another time. Finally, I got to see him, and he said to me, "The reason why I didn't have you come the other time was because the one you came to see wasn't here at that time." Now, what an amazing situation that is, because when you can be aware of, you may not be able to help him. It's not that because you have a shingle out, spiritual directed, that you have to have a verbum for every day. If it isn't there, it isn't there. And I want to say that nothing will be more worthwhile for the person whom you see than hearing sometime that you don't have a verbum for them. I want to say Reb Atum, Reb Atum was sharing with you before all these wonderful things about issues and shadows that have to do with leadership. And there is this wonderful, wonderful danger there, which is, take a look. let's look at this right now, you know. Here sits Zalman, and he is sort of the guy all people are looking at him, you know, and he has to say smart stuff, you know, and be inspirational and all that stuff. And the wonderful thing is that when we sing and when that is happening, yeah, I'm doing good with you, right? And as I'm doing good, the Zalman gets bigger and bigger, it gets inflated. Okay? So let's say it's 7 o'clock when we will stop. If I were to go home with that inflation, Eve wouldn't be able to stand me. You see what I'm getting at? The danger of the inflated self, which is inflated with good stuff, you know, it's not just hot air, there's good spirit coming down, because it's being drawn by the people who seek you out, and it's being drawn by the fact that you are tuning to your own higher being at that point, and you do this in the presence of God, and that's all very powerful and wonderful stuff. And that leads to a kind of inflation that, when it is happening at that time, isn't bad. Because if you are not in touch, you know, what's the point? You want to be in touch. But to claim that this is your day-by-day life in that place, that you're always in touch, and that therefore you have a power to be able to influence people and to do things and to tell them what they have to do, you get into trouble from that. Please.
I have two things to say. One is if you go home and believe your own PR, you're really in trouble. But the other is, that's what they have cast parties for.
Right?
That's why theater people have cast parties. That after you finally open, and there's this whoosh of energy, you have somewhere to put it and celebrate so you can get your feet back down to ground.
Mm-hmm. I think.
And so if you do workshops, sometimes you need to do this, you know, you need to get together with whoever helped you organize and is taking tickets and checks at the door and whatever, and go out and do something silly after it's all over to get yourself grounded back down. It's a mistake usually to go straight home.
There is a sweet little book. Sorry. There's a sweet little book called Tales of the Dalai Lama. It's not his real story, but someone wrote some beautiful stories fitting it into that. And in that tale, there is one in which an Austrian teacher is with the young Dalai Lama. They're at the roof of the Potala in Lhasa, and they're flying kites from there. And kite flying was a big, important sport in Tibet, and you had to also, they had little pieces of, tiny slivers of glass on the string so you could cut your opponent's string and so on. And the young Dalai Lama is so happy flying this kite, and he sees the kite is tugging and pulling and pulling and pulling and wants to go. And so he says to his teacher, why do we have to hold him on the string? Why can't we let him go? So the teacher says, so why don't you find out? Let him go. They let him go, and the kite then plunged down. I'm just thinking about that apropos of what Eve said, that the string has to be below so you can fly above. But when it's all over, you know, don't think you're there. There's a string that takes you back down again.
Yes.
Please.
If you work with a partner, it is a very good idea to switch off so that there isn't one who always flies and one who always has to hold the kite string.
Couple of fly.
But you know, it's a very good thing to, especially if you're reluctant to do it, to do it as a practice, to play with doing the other role periodically, and then pass it back and forth between you, because it is true that I hold the field for you to be able to teach, but it's also true that you give it over to me. And if we do all one or all the other, it isn't good for us, but furthermore, it's boring.
We were one of the first events, I think you were there at that time, when we had the afternoon panels of Ask the Guru. And David Stoner-Rast and David, the one who works with the Brujoy from Finchorn.
Oh, David Spangler.
David Spangler was there, and there were some other wonderful people there. And then one afternoon, it was my turn to be the presiding guru. So I said that today, before we accept the questions that come from the audience, each one of the people on the panel will have to tell us what question we are working on. And there were a few of us who told what questions we were working on, and there were the others who answered our questions. Can you remember that?
I remember something like that.
Well, what I'm trying to say with this is that from time to time, it would also be good for the person whom you are counseling to hear that you're working on something, and that you would be able to tell that. And once there is a moment of mutuality, that the other one, as Eve was said, will hold the string for you, and that you will hold the string for them. That's an important part, to switch around and to allow the vulnerability to happen.
Does anybody here find that who comes to you for counseling is working on your problem? The one who comes to you for counseling, they're working on your problem?
Oh, yes.
A collection of people all working on your problems? It's an amazing radar, that, isn't it?
There was a Hasidic master, he was one of the amazing people who, alas, was killed in the Holocaust. He wrote a book right there in the throes of all the troubles, and put that manuscript in a tin box. It was found after the war in the rubble in Warsaw and was published afterwards. Somebody once asked him, when do you have a time, because he was seeing people, working with people so constantly, when do you have the time to be able to follow what you have to do for yourself? And on his desk he had a little scribbler, a little book. And after every person left, before the next one came in, he made a few notes. And those were the notes that had to do with what he heard in the encounter. And it was later on published as a diary of his, an amazing, amazing document. So you can see how this goes. I like to say the only way to get it together is together. I can't get it together for you, you can't get it together for me. The only way is to get it together is together. So there is a sentence in one of the minor prophets who says, then did those who feared the Lord speak to one another, and God listened in and wrote it into his book that was entitled, Those Who Respect God and Honor His Name, It's that kind of dialogue that is in that great book, as it were. The sense of fellowship that you experience here is so precious because you're all crazy. Isn't it so that your people, your family, all the people around you, you're crazy. And then when you come together and you meet, and you see how normal you really are, and you're not crazy, and you see how the rest of the world really is off, and you're pretty much on track. And that means that that fellowship that you have is very precious, very important. So the thing of being on top of the pyramid, when I was talking about inflation sort of sees you sitting on top of the pyramid and everything is sort of below you, yeah. When you have fellowship with other people, you don't sit on top of the pyramid. And that's one of the big issues that I would like to see. I want to give credit to Pir Vilayat of blessed memory, that he would seek to bring together people, that they should talk to one another and be in the presence of one another and honor really one another, each other's way. But that's not often that that was the case, that there was a sense of bringing, of sharing. I had the opportunity when I was in Vancouver to have some, what was supposed to be private time with the Dalai Lama. And it was wonderful, but it wasn't private. And there was camera there, and there was all that kind of stuff that happened, and it became another event. But when I remember that the first time when I was in Dharamsala then, and we were introduced to the Dalai Lama, and I was saying something about how I have a certain feeling of compassion for him, for the burden that he has to bear for himself and for all the people and the time that's taken up, and how he can't pursue his own soul work so well because of all that. And he grasped my hand at that point, like thanking me for that. I just don't want you to be in a situation where you will be so lonely that you won't have another person with whom you can have these kinds of conversations in which you can always say, I would have liked to have the opportunity for the Dalai Lama to say to me, Zalman, I'm tired. This kind of thing doesn't usually happen between, because we are sort of set up too much. But I would like to see that among you, that you will have people with whom you can have these kinds of connections, these kinds of conversations. Some years ago, this way, he says, everyone has an inclination for good, an inclination for evil. So why should you have a friend? He says, because when two friends talk to another, my inclination for evil isn't on you, it's only on me. My inclination for good is on you also. So you have two inclinations for good against one inclination for evil. And that's a wonderful teaching this way. Another one I got from his son-in-law, the other Rebbe, and Eve likes that one a lot, when he said, we sure believe in reincarnation. He says, but only a fool waits to die before he starts the next one. Just think on that, Only a fool waits to die before they start the next one. Because sometimes in the story that you get, imagine you hear a person who underneath all the stories, the main story is a victim story. And if they want to say in that story, it's not going to be so good. So to be able to say, start a new incarnation, start with a new story. It's not a good story you're living out at this point. It brought you to this place, that's good. You have insight in it, that's good. Make a shift, find a better story. Sometimes when you get two friends together, they can attempt to do things that an individual can't. And there is safety in that. And so there is a tale in which the head of our Hasidic Silsila, of Rabbi Zalman of Yadi, when he was young, he was studying with the son of his master. The two of them were friends, and one time they decided that they'd been reading all the good stuff in the holy books, so when are we going to do it? So they decided one night that they're going to make the ascent, the conscious ascent of soul, and take this journey. In the middle of the night, Reb Shneur Zalman rushed to the kitchen and found some beer and a bagel and brought it up to his friend and made him eat it. Because he was in a place where it was so good that he didn't want to come back anymore. So the next day, his master told him, I thank you so much for saving my son's life. He has had this longing, he has had this yearning to go, and you brought him back, and so I'm eternally grateful to you. But tell me something. How could you, in the world of Atzilut, in Brahma Loka, find a bagel and beer? So that's such a wonderful story, because that's what friends are about, to help you at the time when you get in those high places and you feel sometimes, that you may not want to come down. It's good to have a friend who's going to find you the bagel and the beer. So we're all talking about that. Before the high holidays come, I seek out at least 3 of my colleagues. Alas, they're younger than I, because I would have wanted to have some people more my peers to do that with. And I asked them to tell me, is there something that you have seen this year in me that I need to become aware of? That is an important part for people who are spiritual directors, to get some kind of alignment again this way, because it is necessary to get straightened out that way. When you start telling stories, there are always some stories that come up. Say, tell me. Have you got a good story that says that to you? If it comes up, I'll tell them one in the meantime, okay? Here, I don't know if it was Sohravardi or some other great Sufi teacher. And among his disciples, there were 20 of them that were really the good ones, the top ones. And they saw how one of them was getting the royal jelly, as it were, and they were not. And so they were getting a little anxious and jealous about that and didn't like that fact. Nathaniel, was it Sohravardi or was it someone else?
I think you're right.
Okay. And he says to his disciples, I know what's going on for you and what's troubling you. So here is a test for all of us. I want you to take a bird, a living bird, and bring it here, and then I'll tell you what to do. And each one got a living bird, held it in his hands, came back to the master, and said, what shall we do? And he said, go to a place where no one can see you, crush the bird, kill it, then come back. Wow, that's a hard thing. The teacher tells you something, it's a real test. Will you be obedient? Will you not be obedient? You've got to do what he tells you. This is it. So that 19 of them come back with killed birds, and one of them, the bird is still alive. And the teacher looks at him sort of angry, saying, how come your bird is still alive? And he says, Master, I couldn't find a place where no one could see me. Then he turned around and said to them, now you see why he's getting that, because he has a sense of the presence of God. You know? There's a wonderful little book called The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. Did a story come?
Not yet.
Not yet? Yes?
Just to honor it, it was Junaid.
Pardon? Junaid. Thank you. Thank you. See, I know whom to ask. Another thing has to do with the end of the story that was not part of the assignment. You ready? I'll continue. That has to do with a sense of holy dying. There were some English divines, they call them, people in the Church of England, who, despite the fact that they had broken from Rome, still continued in the issues that had to do with spiritual direction. One of them wrote a book called The Art of Holy Living, and another one, The Art of Holy Dying. And so these people were constantly asking these kinds of questions: what goes on inside and how to prepare. A nun once told me that the issue in spiritual direction is to reduce our resistance to God. The one issue in spiritual direction is to reduce our resistance to God. So one of the things that has to do with that is a sense of how would you like to be in your dying moment? When Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was reporting that once one of her people who was about to die was saying, "Ich will mein Sterben erleben." I want to live through my dying. I don't want to be out when that happens. Woody Allen says, "I don't mind dying as long as I don't have to be there." That's the opposite of that, because that is dying with avidya, with nescience. I don't want to know, I don't want to know. And if you get to the place that I want to do that, and I want to be there in this place, it's like saying the drop falling into the ocean, that ecstasy with which it falls into the ocean and becomes part of the ocean. That kind of thing. So in thinking about that, there's always the point of what is the closure of something? What is it aiming for? You know, how does it want to be? What's the good music to have when you go? Tomorrow I hope to bring a boombox along because I'd like to play for you a piece of something that I recorded for the dying. That element, that work that you may have to do, and there aren't better people than you, is to be also able to do that in hospice. Who needs more than people who are on their way out to have the kind of loving, gentle guidance that takes away the sting from dying? Remember that wonderful piece by Rumi, "I was born a stone, I died as a stone, and was born as a plant. And I died as a plant, and I was born as an animal, and I died as an animal, was born as a human being, and died as a human being, and was born as an angel, and died as an angel, was born into God. O death, where is your sting? So much I gained through your agency." you know? You get that sense. So, or do you remember reading, by the way, the birthday, he had his birthday today, Vonnegut. It's his birthday, his 84th birthday. When he did this, what's the name of the book that I want?
Cat's Cradle.
Yeah, Cat's Cradle, thank you. When he did Cat's Cradle, do you remember how he has the Bokononians die?
Wait, let's at least look. How many of you have read Cat's Cradle?
We gotta do what...
Okay, so the ones who know, tell the ones who haven't.
There is a scene there. These people have a religion like the Falun Gong is forbidden in that country at this point. But they still are doing it. And the mode of worship is to lie down on the floor and to touch foot to foot and to do something with the feet together, and that's their kind of worship. And when one of them is about to die, his friend comes and says, repeat after me, God made mud, God made mud. And then he goes on to say, and God told some of the mud to sit up. God told some of the mud to sit up. Lucky mud.
Lucky mud.
And some of this mud became conscious. Lucky mud, lucky mud. And so he goes on to say, and now it has to go back again into mud again, my life. And I can't wait to find out what my wampitor was and who was in my karas. Do you remember that? Yeah. What's a wampitor? A wampitor is that pivot around which my life turned all the time. It has something to do with what Gurdjieff used to call the
Chief feature.
The chief feature, right? Thank you. It's that thing that you say, I'll never make that mistake again. and then you find out it's the same old bride but with a new veil, you know. You make the same mistake again. And I think every one of us is like an opal, you know. In one light it looks like a stone that's cracked on the inside, and another light it has beautiful fire, and so on. So that's how this thing is. So he said, I want to know what my wampitor was, which is to say, why did I come down to earth? What was a chief notion? What did I have to try and work out in this lifetime? And how did that go? And the other thing is, who was in my karas? My karas contains all of the destiny people that I had to interact with in a lifetime. And just look around and see who is in your karas now. Go ahead. Turn around, look. What a wonderful thing it is to be able to say, with these people, I did destiny with, you know? I did life with, and this was so wonderful.
Yes, I have some. If you want to take a breath, just let me know when.
Okay. That was fine.
So I'm hearing with the dying of the day, the death stories. And it just so happens that my own mother, who was a wild one, came to live with us for about a year and then died in July, actually. And I'm thinking of the great service that she had, not only from the people in hospice, but some of the people who came to help me in her care. One of whom, Donna, came in one evening and said, Sheba, why are you arguing with your guides? And she said, you see them too? And she said, of course I do. Why are you giving them such a hard time? She said, tell them to go away, I don't want to go yet. It's a wonderful thing, if you're seeing things, to let people know. So don't feel so lonely. You have to understand, my mother was also the the kind who every once in a while she would just get so incensed. Is anybody up there listening? Or am I talking to the wall? And she was in the midst of one of these times. She's not the only one. Somebody had given her a fax machine, and she didn't know how to operate it yet. They just plugged it in, they put the paper in, the box away. She's not a technically minded person, she wasn't, so she didn't know what to do with it. She hadn't sent anything, she didn't know how to send anything. And she was in the midst of one of these periods of asking God for a sign. You listening? I want to know, I want a sign. And the next morning, she came into her office and a paper was sticking up and it said, transmission received. So I found out after her death that she also somehow managed to send messages, though not directly to me. She had a very good friend who lived in California but taught in Europe and was gone during the period of my mother's transition. And the few days before she died, she couldn't really speak. And she died on the 4th of July. Everybody who knew her said, oh, leave it to Bibi to go with a bang. Nancy, her friend, called from Europe to her phone in California, got the messages, erased them on July the 3rd. She came home the following week. You understand, my mother could no longer speak. And she said, Eve, I got home, there was one message on my answering machine, it was from your mother. And she sounded as good as she did before she got sick. What did she say? Well, it's very odd, she just said, hello Nance, Sheba, I am having a wonderful time. I thought that was pretty neat. But I did take care to check her final phone bill, thinking maybe there were 2 seconds when she could speak and she called Nancy, though how she'd say she was having a wonderful time, I don't know. And the number wasn't on it. So I don't know how she managed this, but she managed it. And Donna, the same one who saw that room full of her guides, says, oh, she's not that far away, but she's not right here. She's busy. So who knows? What occurred to me was the story of Rabbi Moshe ben Levi in the Malach.
Please, tell.
There was a very famous, very honored Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, and when it came his time to die, God summoned the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, and said, look, you're going to pick up a very, very special soul. Give him whatever he asks for. Really treat him like a VIP as you bring him to paradise. And so the angel of death showed up at his door with a long, sharp sword with a drop of the poison of death at the end and said, it's your time, come with me. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi looked at him, it's a stark, noble angel, and said, give me a moment, I have some things to settle and I'll be right there. I'm curious. And the two of them started off the long journey to paradise. And after a while, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, I'm getting kind of tired. You have very long legs. Would you mind very much carrying me? And he said, oh, not at all. And heaved him on his shoulders like a child. And they kept going. And after a while, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said to the angel, you know, I know it's really silly, but that long sword of yours clattering as we walk, it just makes me very nervous. Would you mind terribly if I carried it for you? It was a little alarming to the angel who had never let go of his sword before, but he remembered his instructions and he took it out of its scabbard and gave it to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, who sat up there carrying the sword. And the journey went on peacefully, and they reached the wall surrounding Gan Eden, surrounding paradise, and conversationally, the rabbi asked, do you happen to know where my place might be? And he said, soon. You see, under that palm tree over there, that area, he leaped off his shoulders over the wall with the sword, ran to his place, drew a magic circle around himself, put the sword down, and sat on it and wouldn't budge. Oy. Big trouble. The The angel of death had never lost his sword before, and he needed it to do his work. There was not a second sword of the angel of death. He did not have a spare. This was it, and the rabbi was sitting on it. Apparently engaged in deep meditation. The angel of death was so embarrassed he went and hid for 3 days in a very private place. Finally, God himself had to pry him out and say, "This can't continue. You've got to get your sword back." He said, "How?" God said, "Well, I don't know." But you have to do it. So, the angel of death went to the edge of the magic circle, and he tried. It held, the magic circle held, he could not get in. The rabbi was sitting there apparently in deep meditation, and the angel of death began saying, "Honored Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi." Not a sign of life. And finally he said, I must have my sword back. He didn't even move. He finally began explaining to him what he had found out himself by peeking down to earth as he went between his hiding place and the place of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. And he began just conversationally describing that from the moment his sword was stolen, all life on earth had ceased. It had just come to a complete standstill. The grain and grass had stopped growing. People stopped getting pregnant and having babies. Because you see, he said, a seed has to die to being a seed in order to sprout into wheat. And a fertilized egg in a chicken has to die to being that in order to become first an egg, and again has to die to that in order to hatch into a chick. And lovers have stopped being interested even in each other because you have to die to yourself over and over again to make love. And every egg and sperm must die to being an egg and sperm in order to get born into a baby. And so all life on earth is at a standstill because I, the angel of death, can't continue doing my work because you are sitting on my sword. Well, at that point, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi realized he'd have to do something, and so he opened his eyes and said, "We didn't know this before, did we?" The angel of death said, "No." "I see you have to have your sword back, don't you?" "Yes." "I'll give it to you, but I need you to do something in return." The angel of death got a little nervous because he'd already really been very surprised by this rabbi. But Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, not everybody is quite as ready as I was to drop everything and come with you. Not everybody is curious. So I would like to ask the favor that you not always present yourself in all your starkness with that very long, sharp sword, just like that, but maybe give a little warning, maybe a little illness, maybe somebody should have a chance to pause in their life and take stock and adjust things that have to be adjusted and repair things that have to be repaired and think over what their time on earth has been. Can you do that? And the angel of death thought about that for a while and nodded and said, "Not only that, but there are some who even with a warning from me might be afraid, and perhaps I'll give them more time when their body can rest still, but their mind can wander on a tour of the other realms where they may be able to go before they have to come with me. Will that do?" And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi bowed and said, "That will do," and returned him his sword. And he has been doing his work in peace ever since.
One of the things about hospice work is that the person who is about to die needs to have a voice, needs to be able to say what they have to say. And at that point, to give ear to that is very, very essential. There are some melodies, some music that works for people.
Is the mic? I think the mic's.
We're doing fine.
No.
Can you hear me without it?
Yes.
I'd much rather do it without it because, good, that's going to be easier on me too. I'll take the hearing aid out so I can hear really how loud I am rather than
Zalman?
louder. It's on?
No.
Take
Move
it away.
so it's not in the middle.
Okay, thank you. Was there something I needed to hear that I didn't?
No, it was to move the mic so it wasn't right
Okay.
in front of you.
Sometimes you may want to work with someone who is a music therapist and sit with that person. There have been some wonderful people who have brought the kind of reassuring music to a person. And here it's really important to understand the cultural background of a person. Could you imagine someone who grew up, even though they did not stay all their life with it, at a Protestant home? And you would sit with them because there is an element at that point where there's a certain regression going on. You see, the powers, the ego powers are no longer there. The sense of being able to, look how much time we spend making our face. You know, this is who we are, this is how we present ourselves, and that presentation of self is what takes up a lot of, what I say, consciousness, energy. How do I come on to the people? How do they see me? You know, this kind of stuff. And it drops at this point for many people. It's not anymore, that's no longer the concern. And so they may have something to share that's on their mind. Sometimes there's unfinished business. And that's a very important part. You may even be called to a person in a coma. You know, if they don't hook them up to machines, sometimes they still linger for quite a while. And the first case that I had when I just began to be a congregational rabbi is I was called to the bedside of a person. A woman, she had been for quite a while in a coma. And it wasn't clear what's keeping her yet, you know. Then I asked her son, isn't it true that you're supposed to be married next month? He said, yes. So I said, are you prepared to make a promise to your mother that you will not postpone the wedding, even if she dies? And he made that promise to her, and 2 hours later she was gone. Now, I can't swear that one was a cause and the other one was the effect, but there is an element of that which has to do with closure. And if there's unlived life and closure hasn't happened to people, that's a difficult one. So, I remember when I was in yeshiva still, and I was traveling from Borough Park to Eastern Parkway. I had to take the BMT and then go and switch to the IRT on Pacific Avenue. If you know New York, you'll know where that was. In the BMT, they have a little space at the beginning, at both ends of the wagon, where the conductor sits in case he drives a train from there. The controls are there, except that the handles are taken off unless the guy drives it there. I used to love to sit in that place, because then I wasn't disturbed by the advertisements. A yeshiva bacher seeing advertisements for maiden bra wasn't the best thing for his consciousness. So I would sit in that little room, and I would say, when we come to this and this station, that's when I'm going to be ready to die. It was this kind of a practice, you know, it sort of we're getting closer. Sometimes it comes out like this in a nightmare to you, this way, that it approaches closer and the brakes come on and it stops, and now it is. That moment of readiness was important as part of being able to get into places in prayer that I couldn't go otherwise. Okay. So when you go and meet some people to work with them in hospice, it's going to be important to be able to come with an equanimity about death, and not to feel that which comes for so many people as a result of ER and all those things that we see, where you have the high adrenaline scenes, people running around, you have to save life at any cost because death is the most terrible thing that can be. And it isn't like that for the people in hospice. So to come with an attitude that I must do something or prevent something. So there is that place where it says you don't have to do anything, just sit there. Just be there. And sometimes that may also be when there is a reluctance of your client to bring up an issue, to just sit there. Not to probe, not to do anything, just to sit there. Something is going to come up. You allow for that which is bearing the pressure inside that person to bubble up that way. And that's important.
Do you remember how you used to be, in the eldering workshops especially, talking a lot about practicing facing your own mortality?
Mm-hmm.
And then you had that emergency surgery and came back from the hospital and said, I've discovered there's a difference between facing your mortality and facing your death. But it's a good practice if we're going to be sitting with people who are dying.
Being on the gurney, you know, and being taken into the operating room, it's not anymore an abstraction.
Do you think they might need a break to push?
We are not gonna go to 7. I haven't got any koyach for that. So I'm figuring about 6:30 is gonna be after $1. Okay.
Can you make it till then?
If you have to sneak out, it's fine. There aren't that many biffies here anyway, so go. Sometimes, you know, it's so much easier to share with people who have the background in all these little details. But in our tradition, we have 3 important meals for the Shabbos. One is Friday night, and that's when family sort of comes together and celebrates things together. And it's sort of homecoming, and the quality for Friday night is to be with mother. Shabbos morning is you go to synagogue and you listen to the reading of the Torah. And the second meal is like you have a meal with Father. And you talk a lot about what is the content of the Torah reading and so on and so forth. And those 2 meals you have at home. But then, among Hasidim and in Eastern Europe, it was very much that custom that they would come back to the synagogue for the 3rd meal. call it shalashudas, the third meal. And when they come back to the third meal, often there wasn't a lot of lavish food. It was a piece of challah and a bit of herring and maybe some schnapps along with that. And then they would sit, and could you imagine what this would have been like if we didn't have any artificial light here? And as the day sort of settles down,
And you can't light until it's really the end.
3 stars are out. And so you get that sense that also comes in that hymn, now the day is over, and so on and so forth. And also in that other hymn, abide with me, fast falls the eventide. And when this kind of thing happens, there's a settling down, and the dream gets dreamt, and the melodies we sing are sort of those kind of melodies that go to the place. What are we going to do next week? How will we handle it? And so on. So the Baal Shem Tov said, why is it that the third meal we do it together in a group rather than private at home? And he said like this, on the Sabbath we give an additional soul. We're given an additional soul. When the Sabbath goes away, the additional soul goes away. And that's a good time to learn how to die. To let go of the additional soul and to have other people present at that time so you don't feel alone, you don't feel abandoned at that time. That's the reason, again, to come back why so much spiritual work needs to be done in hospice so that the people won't feel abandoned and alone at that time. Our custom is that even after a person's demise, we have some people there with the body. The reason being is pretty clear, because you have people who have had out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences. And when you see yourself floating, over your body at this point, and the disorientation that happens for people at that time. On the one hand, I feel so much better now that I don't have the pain in my body. And on the other hand, am I dead? What does it mean? So we have a custom, for instance, that in the house of a mourner, we cover the mirrors. Some people say because we don't want the mourners to be working on vanity or how they present themselves. But the deeper reason is you don't want the deceased soul to look in a mirror and not see himself. Okay? That's a frightening thing. Could you imagine what that would be like? So we also want to have companionship for a period after that until the interment. And what you want to say to that person is, if they haven't gotten out of the body yet, get out of the body. It's time to get out of the body. And moreover, reach out for the helpers that are there on the other side. I'm mentioning all these things because somehow I have a feeling that the deeper you will get into your work, even with the people who are not in hospice, sometimes bringing up this stuff in conversation is going to be helpful in breaking barriers down and realigning oneself. What I'm doing day by day, what I came here for to do, What is my unlived life asking of me? Another question that in spiritual direction we have to pay attention to. So to be able to go and do that. Someone was in charge of the lights and I saw that they could do that. So I'll ask him to take him down a little bit. Yes. So now I need some help here. How many of us are here? So that because for tomorrow I will need to go to Kinko and print off a few sheets of things, and I want to know how many to make.
Zalman, there's about 64, and people also would love to have a copy of the prayer you read the first day you came.
Yes. Good. It's in the, I'll bring some booklets along also, some of which we will use and some of which will be for sale if you want them, all right? For tomorrow, if you have any particular one item that you like that you brought along with you, that if you had an altar in your room, you would put it there, bring that along. If you have a shawl or a scarf or something that you would wear during prayer, bring that along. If you have tasbih, beads or something like that you use in your prayer, bring that along, because tomorrow I'd like us to explore some things in worship and prayer and meditation. And the reason why I like to do this especially tomorrow, because as the sentence is in the Psalms, from the rising of the sun unto its setting, praise be the name of the Lord. And when you figure that on the East Coast, and you watch the swath of prayer that comes across the country on a Sunday morning, and there's an updraft happening at that time. So we want to join with that updraft, and as it says, lift up your hearts. We want to be able to do that tomorrow too. Because one of the functions of spiritual direction is also to help the person with whom you're working to get their prayer life into shape. And not only as a solo thing, but also how to socialize it. And tomorrow we will be dealing with that, all right? So, a good week, a wonderful week to you, and when you have a chance tonight to spend some time looking at your own dream and make some notes about where we were today, that would be a good thing. And if you have any good dreams tonight that you feel are ready, that you're ready to share with other people, that would be a very special thing. So you'll let me know tomorrow morning when we get started. If you have a dream, don't tell a long Megillah, you know. But yes, tell it, like Eve always says, without commentary. You know, just how the dream happened and so on. It's not necessarily that we have to figure that anybody will interpret it for you. That's not the point. But sometimes we dream dreams for other people. So I hope to see you then tomorrow morning.
Do any of you have breakfast together?
Yes.
I really do suggest finding a dream buddy, maybe make an appointment tonight, and exchange your dreams at breakfast. And that way, whoever has dreamed a dream that really is for all of you, it'll come out earlier and you won't have to bumble around trying to figure that out once he's here.
Good. So now the only thing that remains is that you should give each other hugs again. And that you will let us go.